Hey there, this is Ross Izzard, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing in more interesting places in the wintertime. So, we are 2 episodes into Season 2 here. We spent the first episode talking about generally what I wear to stay warm out there, with a real focus on the old, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. So really talking about your head, your body, your legs, all of which are super important for a lot of reasons, but none of which hurt quite as badly as your hands when you're fishing. I am going to dedicate today's episode, this entire episode, to just your frozen hands and fingers. That sounds like a silly thing to do. Why on earth do we need to spend an entire podcast episode talking about your hands? Well, the reason for that is that your hands are likely to hurt worse than just about anything else on your body when you are fly fishing in the wintertime, especially if you're fly fishing in some of those really cold backcountry canyons in the wintertime. And the truth is, there's not a ton you can do about it. Your hands are just going to hurt. There's no solution to make all the pain go away. But you can make it tolerable. And this season is all about how we keep you on the water, keep you fishing through the coldest months of the year, and keep you comfortable enough, not comfortable, right? That's a different thing, but comfortable enough that you can continue to fish. That's what we're trying to do. We need you to be able to stay out there for more than an hour. I want you to go home because you're done fishing or because your wife's going to yell at you or you've got somewhere to be, not because your fingers hurt so damn bad that you can't fish anymore. I have been there. Let me tell you, it's not fun trying to work with half frostbitten fingers. It's not good. And it doesn't have to be that way. There are ways to mitigate your frozen, cold, painful hands on the river, and today we're going to talk about them. But first, I want to start with a story. And this is a story that goes back to years ago when I first was getting back into fly fishing. If you want to hear the whole backstory of how I got into fly fishing or got back into fly fishing after trying it when I was very, very young, you can go back. There's an episode in season 1 where I give you all the gory details. I didn't think it was going to be that interesting, but a lot of folks did find it interesting. So that's pretty cool. So if you want to hear the whole story, go check that out in season 1. Here's the abbreviated version. I got back into fly fishing later in life thanks to a work trip that reintroduced me to it. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and as it happened, the timing of me getting excited about fly fishing again coincided with the beginning of winter. So I am recording this in late November. We were fishing, as I recall, in late November, probably not more than a week or two after where we are now during this particular trip. And I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea how to fish. I couldn't catch fish. I was clueless. I didn't know what I was doing. And one of the guys who I worked with, I won't name him here because, I work in politics and not everybody wants to be called out. But one of the guys that I worked with and a friend of mine happened to be a fly fishing guide for a very famous hotel here in Colorado. And he offered to take me out and kind of show me the ropes. He asked me what I was doing. I told him. He was kind enough not to laugh in my face, but I could tell from the look on his face that he was disappointed in me. So he offered to take me out. And so he did take me out. We went to a stretch of the South Platte, not far from where I live. Pretty famous stretch, but right in the middle of a just sunless canyon. There's a tall lip on the northern side, or I should say the southern side of the river in this section, which means that most of that face is northern facing or north facing. And as a result, this particular area doesn't get a lot of sunlight. It eventually gets a little bit real late in the day, think like, 11, noon, 1. But until then, it's dark in there. There's no sunlight and it's cold. It's really, really cold. And so we were out there. I think we got there at, 8 a.m. And it was cold. It was low 20s, I would say. And we get geared up, and he had lots to tell me about how to gear up and how to rig my stuff. And naturally, I was doing most of that wrong, too, and he showed me what to do. And I pulled on my shitty starter waders, and I put on, my big, heavy winter gloves because I thought that those were going to work for me, and they were all that I had. And he said, no, you're not going to want those. Just leave them in the truck. And I said, man, I don't know. It feels pretty cold. He said, no, just leave them in the truck. You'll be fine. And we set off for the river. So I walked with them. We tromped around through the snow. And within about 5 minutes of even walking, this is before we started fishing, my hands started to hurt so badly that I was blowing. You know how you cup your hands and you blow into them to try to get some extra warmth onto them? I was doing that like I was in a disaster movie of some kind. I mean, it was ridiculous. And they hurt so bad that I had my hands tucked up into, fists, tight little balls, just trying to warm them up. I was stuffing them down my waders, putting them in my own armpits, breathing on them, doing everything I could to try to keep them warm. And this guy was just completely unbothered. He didn't have gloves on. His hands were out. He was fishing and doing his thing. And I remember watching him fish. We fished that day. I caught some pretty decent fish. I still have the pictures. And it turned out to be an okay morning, but I could not for the life of me figure out how this guy was managing this with his hands. I mean, he would occasionally put them in his pocket or whatever, but otherwise, I mean, his hands were just out and exposed. And I thought that was the craziest thing in the world. And actually, after that trip, I didn't go back out for a month or so because I thought, man, it's so cold that I just cannot tolerate the idea of my hands hurting that bad. I mean, it feels like somebody driving an ice pick through your fingers. It doesn't feel good. And I just thought maybe this winter fly fishing thing is not for me. And it was an instructive lesson for me because when I went out, I expected a lot of challenges. I knew fly fishing was hard. I knew the water was going to be cold. But I considered myself pretty tough, and I did not expect my fingers to hurt so badly that I would be, eyes watering and on the verge of having to call it quits and go home. And that was my first experience with cold hands fly fishing. I have had many hundreds of experiences with cold hands fly fishing since then. And during that time, through an awful lot of suffering and cussing and wondering what the hell I'm doing out there when it's 5 degrees, and fishing, and everybody else wondering the same thing, thinking that I'm crazy, I've come up with some mitigation strategies. I'm not going to call them solutions. Listen, there's a famous quote that I've used before from Thomas Sowell. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. That's what we have here. It's not a solution. I can't make this completely better for you because you're still out fly fishing in the bitter cold in the dead of winter. But I can make it suck a little bit less. And so I want you to be able to go out. Maybe it's not your first rodeo. Maybe you've been winter fishing for a while. But if you're new to it, or if you just kind of don't do a lot of it, or if you're just trying to get more comfortable doing it, my hope is that this episode will save you from the experience that I had where, I barely remember the fish I caught. All I remember is how miserable my hands were. And you don't have to be that guy. You don't have to be me. You can do better. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. We are going to split this up into a few different sections. I know it sounds crazy to think that we would need different sections of a podcast to talk about hands, but we do. There are a few different things that we need to cover. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to cover what you wear on your hands. We're going to cover keeping your hands dry and why and how you ought to do that. We are going to cover how to warm up your hands if you can't keep them dry and they do get cold. And then we're going to cover when to call it quits. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into the first bucket, which is what the hell you should wear on your hands. Now, this question might be better answered not with what you should wear on your hands, although I'm going to tell you that in a second, but maybe with what you shouldn't wear on your hands. And let me tell you, there's a lot of stuff out there that companies are going to try to sell you, people are going to try to sell you, that is you think is going to be the best thing in the world. You're going to look at it and go, yeah, it makes perfect sense. And it's made by Simms. It's made by a reputable fishing company. No offense, Simms. I love you guys. And you're going to think, man, that probably works, right? I see it on Instagram and it looks legit and the concept works. And so why don't I do that? And you're going to buy it. It's probably going to be expensive, $100, $200. I don't know how much you pay. And it's not going to work. And I've tried all of these. Guys, all of them. This is not just me like raging about my preferred method. I have tried all of them. I'm probably $1,000 or more into trying to keep my hands warm while winter fly fishing. And so this is coming from experience and an awful lot of wallet pain. So, you don't have to listen to me. You can go buy this stuff on your own, but I can save you some time and save you some money by telling you what not to buy and what not to wear on your hands. Let's start with the real obvious one. You can't wear like ski gloves, winter gloves, fingered winter gloves while you're fly fishing out there. I've seen people try to do this. It's not going to work ever for a couple of reasons. The first one being that, wearing those gloves is like being an astronaut in space. You're trying to manipulate little teeny tiny things. I mean, the astronauts are using tools and tightening nuts and screws and whatever else. You're dealing probably with like size 22 zebra midges. Trying to do that with fingers that have 3 millimeters of fluffy material on them is impossible. You actually literally can't do it. If any of you can tie on a size 22 or smaller fly on 6X tippet wearing full-blown winter ski gloves, send me an email or call me and send me a video, and I'll send you $100. Just show it to me. I want to see somebody do it because I don't believe that you can do it. And by the way, it doesn't count if it takes you like 10 minutes. You got to be able to do this in a reasonable amount of time, like a minute or less, right? But I don't believe you can do it. That's thing one. Your hands just don't work when they're in these crazy winter gloves. It's not what they were made for. It's not what the gloves were made for. Fly fishing requires tons of motor control and dexterity. These things just don't work. They just don't. So don't do it. The second thing about those is that they're made out of the wrong stuff. So when they get wet, and they will get wet, no matter how hard you try to keep them dry, they will get wet. They get soaked through, and then they are completely useless. Those things are designed to be, air quotes, waterproof in snow. They are not designed to be waterproof in liquid water. And once they get wet, the insulation fails entirely. You lose all benefit from them. Your hands are miserable. They're soggy and awful inside. And they stop functioning. You're better off being barehanded at that point. So don't bother with those. No, you can't wear your normal ski gloves. Just don't do it. Honest to God, you're better off going out with naked hands than using those. That's thing one. The next one that doesn't work is mittens. And this includes, by the way, these specialized fishing mittens that you can buy for an obscene amount of money, where your fingertips and your thumb are exposed most of the time. And then when you're ready to warm your fingers up or you get too cold, you pull a little like cap or a tip down over your thumb. Then you fold the mitten portion down over your fingers. And then you can, have warm hands and they warm up nicely. These are one of those things that seem like a great idea and concept. They should work. The reason they don't work, really there are two reasons. The first one is they're ridiculously impractical. Okay, so anybody who's been fly fishing for any amount of time knows that fly line loves to get stuck on everything. There are days where I swear there is a magnet inside the line that seeks out every zipper, every snag in my clothing, every clip on my waders, every little piece sticking off of my backpack. It just wants to grab everything, right? And there's just always line you got to deal with. I mean, that's what makes fly fishing different, is that you're kind of hand managing this line. It's not like a spin reel where it's all kind of neatly piled up on your reel. A lot of it's out, it's dangling, it's in the water, it's moving around. It's just a different thing. Those mittens are they're like the Cookie Monster for fly line. They just gobble it up. They love it. The line will get stuck behind that little finger section that you pull up, the mitten section that you pull up over your fingers. It will get stuck in there. It will get stuck on your thumb flap. It will get wrapped up all over the gloves in 15 different ways. It's going to get stuck. You have an extra thing hanging off your hands. You have line everywhere. It's gonna drive you crazy. Trust me, it's gonna drive you nuts. Thing two is they don't really work all that well, because to be honest with you, by the time you're sort of pulling them back over your fingers, number one, there's really not a great time when you're fly fishing to have a mitten on. Like maybe with the hand that's holding the rod, but the truth is, even then, you're probably going to want to have your trigger finger or your middle finger pinching the line to the cork, right? That's a staple of how you hold the fly rod. And if you're not doing that, the chances of you being able to set the hook effectively are basically zero, right? If you don't have that line controlled up against the cork, you have no tension on it, and therefore you can't exert any force, and therefore probably you aren't going to be catching any fish. So it's hard to believe you would ever really want a mitten on that side. because it just removes your ability to feel the line. It can slip through. It's tough to get that pinch. It just doesn't make sense. And then you definitely don't want the mitten on your line hand, right? Because you're probably dealing with, you're pulling it off the reel and you're moving it back and forth. You might be grabbing it to put some tension on it or doing a water load. Or maybe you're trying to just get some extra tension on it as you do a back cast so you can get that heavy indicator nymphing rig out there. Whatever might happen, like your line hand is going to need to, as the name would imply, touch the line. And doing that in a mitten is impossible. And so in practice, what's going to happen here, and this has happened to me, I did this for several winters. I had these gloves. You are going to wind up fishing with your fingertips out anyway, so the mitten features are not going to be used, and then the mitten features are going to drive you nuts. Your stuff's going to get wrapped up in them. They're going to get tangled. They don't work. Now, if you can make them work, more power to you. I'm sure somebody out there is going to be offended by this. I do not believe that those things are viable, and I think they're kind of a cynical cash grab for some of these fishing companies because they just don't work. So that's the second thing that doesn't work. Now, here are a few more real rapid fire things that don't work that I'm going to run through real quickly. Fleece gloves of any kind don't work, even if they're fingerless. Why? Because when they get wet, they're useless. Fleece, when it gets wet, totally useless to you. Loses all of its insulative properties. It'll freeze. You get like ice caked up in the sort of fleecy parts of it. It's horrible. It takes forever to dry. Fleece gloves don't work. I've tried them. They don't work. There's no circumstance where that's the right thing to have on your hands. Nitrile gloves don't work. This is one of those that actually I read about a lot, and I found quite a few forum posts of folks saying that nitrile gloves were the way to go because you still have a whole bunch of dexterity, kind of that thin latex material. You can still feel the line. You're not really losing a lot of sensation. You're not losing a lot of dexterity as you would with a heavy glove. And they keep the water off your hands. And the theory is that if you can keep the water off your hands and keep them dry, and this is partially true, which is why it made sense to me, if you can keep them dry, they'll stay warm enough to function. That makes perfect sense, right? So for a while, I actually did try to wear nitrile gloves out there. I found that my hands, they have zero insulation at all. There's nothing. I mean, they're literally just a thin layer of latex or nitrile, whatever they're made out of. No insulation at all. And your hands sweat in them. So even though there's no water coming through the glove, there is water inside the glove because your hands are sweating in there over the course of the day. And then all of that sweat has the same effect on your hands as getting water from the river on it, right? Water's water. It doesn't really matter whether it came from the river or from your own perspiration. Once it's on your hands, they're going to get cold. And so nitrile gloves, there are people who swear by them. And again, more power to you if it works for you. I tried those for quite a while. I really tried to make them work. I don't believe that they work. I just don't think they're the right answer. So those are out. All right. So that's what doesn't work. And I know, we're 20 minutes in here. I'm still talking about which gloves you shouldn't wear. But I think it's important for you to hear that explicitly because I can just tell you what you should wear. And by the way, what you should wear, here comes the spoiler, is mid-weight, pure wool, fingerless gloves. That's what you should wear. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. But if I only tell you what you should wear, then you might make the mistake of believing that you could go out and find something better. And then you might spend a whole bunch of money on this other stuff that isn't going to work. And you're going to be miserable, and you're going to wind up coming back to the plain old mid-weight fingerless wool gloves that you should have started with for $20 in the first place. And then you might be mad at me. I don't really care about that, but I'd rather you not be mad at me. But more importantly, you'll be miserable, and that sucks because you're going to lose some fishing days to having cold and hurty hands. So mid-weight, fingerless, pure wool gloves. That's what you want to wear. You can buy these things on Amazon. I buy several pairs of these at once because you are for sure going to lose at least one pair every winter if you fish a lot. You will destroy at least one other pair. These are not very durable items, right? So the wool gets pulled out by flies getting snagged in them or tree branches. It just kind of comes unraveled over time. They start looking pretty ratty, like you're a hobo or something. buy extra pairs, but you can buy these for like $20 on Amazon. Even the nice ones are maybe $30. I think the ones I have are from a company called Mary Wool, which makes most of their stuff out of pure merino wool. You can buy them inexpensively, get them in. They are thin enough to be workable for you. They have like a nice long elastic wrist that you can pull down and tuck into a sleeve to provide a little bit of extra insulation and to keep some of that cold wind off of your hands and off of your arms and out of your sleeves. The finger sections are long enough to cover your fingers if you get them sized right. Don't go too small on these things. Bigger is usually better for these gloves. But if you get them right, that finger section is going to come up to pretty much your top knuckle. And that provides some insulation on your hand itself. It provides a lot of insulation on those kind of thick, meaty parts of your fingers, which of course is where most of the blood is and therefore determines how warm your fingers are. But still leaves your fingertips free to do the stuff that you need to do with the fly line, right? So you can still feel the fly line, you can still manipulate it, you can still tie the knots, you can handle the tippet, you can manage the flies, you can pull that little size 22 or 24 midge out of your box without dropping it in the river and cussing at yourself because you got to go home and tie another one. You can make these things work. And the beautiful thing is, if they get wet, I mean, obviously it's better if you don't soak them, so don't get me wrong here. You don't want to get anything soaking wet in the wintertime if you're going to be out there, especially if you're a long way out from your truck or your car. But if they do get a little wet, and they will get a little wet, they're going to get splashed, you're going to touch ice, you're going to put your hand down in snow while you're climbing up or whatever. They're going to get a little bit wet, but wool is amazing, as I've said many times before, and it retains most of its insulating properties when it's wet. So even though the glove might be wet, it's still going to be pretty close to just as warm as it was when it was dry, which makes it an incredibly ideal material and an incredibly ideal gear item for those of us who are out there fly fishing and potentially getting wet. Now, one more note on the gloves themselves. You don't want the super duper thick wool ones. I know the temptation is going to be there to buy the heavyweight stuff. I actually have a couple of really heavyweight pairs, including one pair that's lined with fleece. Again, don't do that. Fleece is not what you want on your hands in the wintertime. But I have a couple pairs of these. The big thick ones really start to limit your dexterity again. It's tough to hold things. It's a little tough to work with things. It can be hard to manage little small items in the palm of your hand, like a split shot or a small fly or something like that, because there's just so much material, right? And it's like kind of rolling around in the folds of the material. You can drop it. I find them very difficult to work with, and the same goes for gloves that have those sort of textured palms or fingers. So they're like the little raised rubberized bumps that I suppose are designed to let you grip stuff better. I don't know exactly what you're gripping with them, but I guess they're designed to give you some extra hold in your grip. Those little studs will drive you nuts because the split shot balls will roll around in there. The flies will get rolled. It's very, very difficult to make those work. So don't get fancy. You just want plain old midweight wool gloves. No frills, nothing fancy, just those. That is the right answer. It's also the cheapest answer. So you're welcome. Now, a couple of notes about how you deal with these gloves while you're out there. The first one is about fish handling, okay? Don't touch fish with your gloves on. Just don't do that. Okay, I made this mistake when I first started out too, and I figured, well, they're fishing gloves, so they must be okay for the fish, right? They're not. They're not okay for the fish. So trout, if you don't know, have a protective slime layer on them. It's basically a thin layer of mucus. It's why they're pretty slippery and slimy. It's their first line of defense against waterborne infections. Anything abrasive, which includes your wool gloves, will, not maybe, but will rub off some of that slime layer, which can lead to an infection for the fish. If you've ever been fishing and you see a fish with like crazy cottage cheese stuff growing on its head or growing on its body, that's probably what happened. It got its slime layer rubbed off. It was vulnerable to infection, and it's picked up a fungal infection. There are other things that they can catch. Just don't touch the fish with gloves. That's not good. So any kind of glove. It doesn't matter whether they're wool or mittens or even the nitriles. I know nitriles are supposed to be okay, and Parks and Wildlife uses them. Just don't wear gloves. Bare hands that have been wetted in the water. Sorry, you're going to have to get your hands wet for this one. That's the way you want to touch the fish. You do not want to touch them with the gloves. That means that when you catch a fish, if you have to unhook it, we're going to talk a little bit more about the professional release here in a minute, but if you do have to deal with the fish to get a picture or to unhook it or whatever, you're going to have to take off your gloves. At this point, you are probably going to be pretty excited because you have a fish, right? You caught a fish, you're going to take a picture of it, and you're just going to throw your gloves down, right? You're going to find like the closest dry patch of ground. You're going to chuck your gloves down. And you're going to go deal with the fish because you're a fly fisherman, man. You're excited that you have a fish and you're going to go deal with it. And then you're going to stand up and you're going to keep fishing and you're going to leave your gloves somewhere on the bank in the snow. And you're not going to be able to find them later. Or even better, you are going to leave them somewhere where they can fall in the water and they're going to get carried away by the river. I actually have a video from back when I used to GoPro myself fishing before I realized that nobody cares about watching me go fly fishing. And then I stopped recording. But I have a video of me fishing in the winter. It's snowy. It's beautiful. And I catch this incredible rainbow trout in this beautiful, beautiful stretch of river. And I'm so excited. And I'm like looking at the fish and trying to get the fish out for the video to capture it. And in the corner of the video, you can actually see one of my gloves floating off down the river because I wasn't paying attention. I didn't have an extra set of gloves with me, and so I was screwed. That was pretty much the end of my day. It was too cold to fish without them. So shortly after that fish, I left, and that's a bummer because I might have caught some more. So don't just throw your gloves on the ground. They might get wet. You could lose them. Instead, you're going to be wearing waders unless you're a crazy person who is doing this wet wading, in which case I via con Dios desperado because it's going to be a short career for you out there on the river. But you're probably wearing chest-high waders, and usually chest-high waders have this interesting little kind of air pocket inside that chest area of the wader. You can take the gloves, and you can just stuff them right down there in that warm section of your waders. Just stuff them in there, put them in there, use it like a basket. Just reach in, stuff it in there. They're not going to fall out unless you happen to go upside down. I don't know why you would do that, but you should avoid it if you can. And they'll be safe. Number one, they'll be safe. Number two, they'll be dry because your waders are waterproof, right? So they're going to keep them safe from any splashes or whatever might be going on. And then when you pull them out, they might be kind of warm because they're up against your chest, just, snuggling there. And so when you put them back on, maybe you'll even get lucky and you get a little bit of that, mom's warm laundry feeling on your hands. But just stuff them there. Don't do anything else with them. Don't try to strap them to yourself. Don't use those stupid cords that run down your coat sleeves and then hold your gloves there when you take them off. Don't do that. Just stuff them down the front of your waders. You'll be happy that you did. On that same note, like I just said, if you don't have extra gloves and you do lose a pair of gloves, you're probably going to be screwed. You're either going to spend the rest of the day fishing miserable with your hands exposed, freezing, and just hurting. It sucks. Or you are going to have to go home, which is what I had to do when that aforementioned story happened to me. So carry an extra pair. These things are cheap. Like I said, you should buy them in, batches of 2 or 3 because why not have extras? You're going to get through them. But throw an extra pair in your backpack, guys. Like they weigh nothing. They don't take up that much room. Just put an extra pair in your backpack. If one of them gets soaking wet or it gets ripped or you lose it, you got extras. Okay, fine. Put your, get them out of your pack, put them on, carry on fishing because that's what we're out there to do. All right, here is the second bucket, and it's how to keep your hands dry and what happens if they get wet. Wet hands are not a great idea in the wintertime. That seems like common sense until you, number one, watch people get their hands soaking wet in the wintertime all the time. Just walk along a river in a busy section during the winter. You're going to see people sticking their hands in the water for all kinds of reasons. They slip and they stick their hand in the water to try to steady themselves. They try to dig in the water for their flies. They're messing around with the fish in the net. Whatever it might be, I see people get their hands wet all the time. And of course, it's easy to do because you're in a river, right? There's water there. So you might get your hands wet. But you really shouldn't get your hands wet. And your goal out there, if you want to be comfortable and if you want to have a nice long day of fishing, should be to keep them dry at all costs. And there are a few different ways that you can do that, ranging from how you fish to the stuff you bring with you. So let's start with how you fish. you, in a lot of cases, are going to be fishing nymph rigs in the wintertime, which means that you are probably going to be fishing near the bottom. The game with nymph rigs is almost always to get those nymphs heavily weighted down into the strike zone, which is an inch or two off the bottom in most cases, as quickly as possible. The nature of that is that you are going to be ticking bottom. Your flies are going to be hitting the bottom every so often. If they're not, they're probably not deep enough, and you might want to adjust where your indicator is or how you're handling your tight line. But you're going to be real close to the bottom, and as a result, you're going to be catching fish salad all day. Okay, so that like nasty green algae stuff, grasses, twigs, stickfish, all kinds of stuff. Random like case caddis larvae are going to come up. I've lost count of how many cased caddis larvae I have caught on Colorado rivers out here during the wintertime. It drives me nuts to catch flies, real flies, on my flies. It is a crazy thing. But you're going to be pulling stuff up, and it's going to get all over your flies, and then you're going to have to clean your flies off because no self-respecting trout is going to eat your fly with, salad hanging all over it. So you're going to have to clean them off. Sometimes you'll be able to just do that with your fingers and get away with it, right? You can clean it off, try not to get them too wet, dry them off afterward, and you can kind of get away with it. Maybe it's a little bit warmer. It's like late afternoon or mid-afternoon, and it's warmed up to 40 or 50, and you can get away with doing this. But if it's really, really cold, I'm talking like well below freezing. So think, 10, 15, 20 degrees. If it's windy, especially because wind chill is a real thing in the wintertime, you don't want to touch that stuff. It's going to get you wet. It's wet. It's sticky. It's going to get all over your gloves. It's going to get your fingertips wet. You don't want to do that. You don't want to touch it. And so you're going to have to get used to some stuff that seems odd for fly fishing. And that's called the San Juan slap. Okay, so if you have a bunch of crap on your flies and you really don't want to touch your flies, what you might have to do is whip your flies across the water so that the tension of the water and the whipping pulls the junk off of them. Now, I'm going to preface this with two things because I hear a few people rolling their eyes at me right now. Number one, only do this in fast water where you're not going to disturb the entire river, and only do it in sections that you've already fished, right? So don't do this 5 feet from where you're trying to fish. Don't do it 10 feet behind the most juicy looking prime lie in the river. Use it on a section that you've already beat up or a fast section where the rapids are going to cover it. But basically what you're going to do is you're just going to get your flies going in a windmill, get that line going in a windmill, and your goal is to basically slap those flies across the surface of the water until they come out clean. It doesn't take a lot. It's going to take 3, 4, 5 slaps to do it. But eventually they're going to come out squeaky clean because the water just scrubs them off. It's like a poor man's pressure wash. And that's something that you probably ought to get used to doing if you don't want to get your hands wet on this stuff. Similarly, if your flies get stuck on the bottom, because again, you're going to be fishing close to the bottom most of the time. If they get stuck on the bottom, don't put your hand in there after them, guys. I know it's tempting. I tie all my own flies too. I hate losing flies like that. And sometimes you can see them. You can see where they are on a log. You're like, well, I think I could just reach in there and don't do that. Resist that temptation. Resist that intrusive voice in your head. Don't put your hand in the water. It is not worth it. When that water is 36, 37 degrees and the air temps are 10, 15, 20 or lower, you do not want to do that. It's not worth it. Trust me, you're better off warm at home at your vise, happily tying a fly to replace that thing than you are trying to recover it. Just point your rod at it, pull on the line, break them off, retie. You're going to be happier that you did it. But don't put your hands in the water. Connected to that is what happens if you catch a fish. We talked about this a minute ago with the gloves, where you need to stuff them down in your waders to unhook the fish and yada, 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 yada. But really, it's better if you don't get your hands wet at all and if you don't have to handle the fish at all. For a couple of reasons. Number one is it'll make your hands stay dry, which will make you happier. The other one is it's better for the fish. If it's really, really, really cold outside, so, well below freezing, fish live in the water. They're wet. And for the same reason that you don't want to get your fingertips wet and then expose them to the air, you don't want to expose a wet fish to the air. They don't have eyelids. They can't blink. You're going to freeze their faces, freeze their eyeballs, freeze their skin. It's actually really, at the least, very unpleasant and painful for them. And at the worst, potentially harmful for them. So you really don't want to be having to pull the fish out of the water and handle them a whole bunch in the wintertime at all in the coldest conditions. But if you really don't want to get your hands wet, the best thing you can do is what I call the professional release. Other people call it the long distance release. You can call it whatever you want. Short version is you should be fishing barbless hooks. You just should. You're not going to lose that many fish on barbless hooks if you know what you're doing and have decent technique. It's nicer to the fish. And in the wintertime, it's way better for you because what you can do is you can hook that nice fish and you can fight him and reel him in, and he's at the net, and you see him, and you're like, okay, cool, it's a 16-inch bow. I'm excited about it, or a 20-inch brown. I mean, whatever it happens to be. You don't need to take a picture of every fish you catch. If it's not a trophy, I am just going to let my line go slack. And anybody who fishes with barbless hooks knows that if you don't keep constant tension on that line, the fish is going to spit the hook. Like 99% of the time, they're going to shake their head and spit the hook. This is why when you net a fish with a barbless fly in its mouth, I would say 90% of the time before you bend down to unhook it, it's already unhooked itself and the fly is stuck in the rubberized netting because they're pretty good at getting that stuff out of their mouth as long as it is barbless and as long as there's no tension on the line. So I'll very often pull them in. I don't even get my net out. I just look at them and I go, oh, that's a cool fish. And I count it. I log it. And then I just let that line go as slack as I can. I might even give them a little bit of wiggles or shakes or whatever. And I would say the vast majority of the time, they manage to spit that hook out on their own. They swim off. I never have to touch them. They never come out of the water. My hands stay perfectly dry. I don't have to manipulate those little flies. Everybody is happy. So get used to trying to do the professional release. I know that seems kind of anathema to a fly fisherman who feels like you have to land the fish. I went through that phase too. Eventually, you're going to catch so many fish that it's not going to matter to you. You're just happy that you got him. And you're going to be a lot more concerned with being comfortable. So take the tension off of those barbless hooks. Let that guy have a chance to shake his head and get out of there. And do your best to not handle the fish in the coldest temperatures, both for your sake and for the fish's sake. If you do have to handle them or you get your hands wet for any reason, so let's say that you fall and you get your hands wet that way or whatever, you want to dry them off. Okay, so I've said before a couple times, you should carry a hand towel with you during any type of cold conditions. It's easy. You can stuff it right in the front of your waders. Like I was talking about with the gloves earlier, you can put it in one of your wader pockets. Whatever. There's 15 different ways that you can carry a hand towel. But you should carry one and make sure it's dry, because if you do get your hands wet, the best way to keep them warm, you get out that hand towel, you dry your hands right off. Just get them dry. Takes 2 seconds. It is going to dramatically improve your ability to keep your hands warm. You're going to be a happier camper. And let's be real, you have a ton of dish towels laying around at home. Just steal one, right? You got one, you got a rag laying somewhere out in your garage or whatever. Doesn't have to be fancy. It's your fishing towel. You can get a cool one with a fish on it if you want to, or you can just use a shitty one that you use to mop your floor. I mean, it doesn't matter. Just make sure it's dry. Keep it in your waders. Dry off your hands every time they get wet. And then when they're dry, and only when they're dry, put your fingerless wool gloves back on. Don't put them on when your hands are wet. That's not a good thing to do, because then the inside of your gloves are getting wet. Dry your hands off, then put the gloves back on. And to do that, you got to have a hand towel. That's bucket number 2. Keep them dry. All right, bucket number 3 is what you do when your hands are already cold. Maybe they got wet. Something happened. It's just bitter outside, and you got to warm them up. I call this recharging. Okay, so this is a situation where your hands are starting to hurt. You've done everything you can. You've done everything right. You're wearing the right stuff, including, by the way, I should have mentioned this earlier, keeping your core warm is going to help a lot with keeping your hands warm. You are going to want to have good layering going on. You can listen to last week's episode if you want to learn more about that. But the warmer your core stays, the warmer your extremities will stay. So don't neglect that part when you're talking about keeping your hands warm. But let's say you've done everything right. You're layered up, your core's warm, you're wearing the right gloves, you kept your hands dry, and then something happens, or maybe it doesn't, and it's just freezing cold outside, and your hands are cold and they hurt, and you feel like you got to get them warm again. There are ways to do that. And those ways involve 2 things. Number 1, good pockets, and number 2, hand warmers of some kind. When I say good pockets, I mean insulated pockets. So a lot of good winter waders have fleece-lined hand warmer pockets built into the chest portion of the wader. Lets you get a little bit of body heat from inside the wader. There's fleece on the outside. I know I said earlier fleece is bad for gloves, but it's good in these warmer pockets. And they're really comfortable just on their own to put your hands in there. Now, you don't want unlined pockets. They're better than nothing, but they're not going to give you a lot of insulation. And you kind of want to be thoughtful about how you do this. If you're putting your gear on right, your jackets are going to be primarily inside the waders, like we talked about last episode. You're probably not going to be wearing jackets over the top of your waders. You can. I typically don't, but you can. And that means really the only pockets you're going to be wearing or that you're going to have access to are those on your waders. Number one, that means that you're going to have to be thoughtful about the waders that you buy, right? Check the pockets. A lot of people don't do that. They look at the wader and, oh yeah, it fits me. It's a wader. It's going to be great. Check the pockets, put them on, make sure it is comfortable for you to be able to put your hands in there, make sure that it works with your gear. So like if you're wearing a chest pack or a backpack or a hip pack or whatever, make sure that you can still get your hands into those pockets, because if the rest of your gear blocks the pockets, obviously they are useless to you. You've taken away one of your most valuable tools when it comes to recharging your cold hands. And then inside the pocket, you don't have to have hand warmers in there. It's optional, I guess, but I always have them. You want to put some hand warmers in there just to kind of give it a little bit of extra sauce and create like a little oven. The warmer it is, the faster your hands are going to warm up, and the less time you have to spend with your hands in your pockets, which means the more time you can spend fishing. I've tried a million different kinds of hand warmers. I've tried the fancy electronic ones that you charge. They work really well, and they're actually nice to use, except for the fact that if they get wet, because they're electronic, they stop working. You're probably going to get them wet eventually, so there's that. If you drop them in the river, they're gone, and that kind of sucks because they're expensive. And also, batteries don't do well in the cold. Most people know that, but electronics and batteries really don't do very well in the cold. And that means if you're fishing really cold conditions, you might only get, 2 or 3 or 4 hours out of those things on the highest setting, which is what you're going to want. And you may be out there for 6 or 7 or 8 hours. So when that battery expires, that's the end for you. You don't have warm hands anymore. Obviously, that's not ideal. I really do think it's hard to go wrong with the basic chemical hand warmers. I use Hot Hands, right? I'm sure there are other brands out there. Hot Hands are the ones that you see in Walmart and Target. They're all over the place all the time. They're little fabric bags filled with chemicals, basically, that when they are exposed to oxygen, exposed to the air, and you shake them up a little bit, that powder inside has a chemical reaction that produces a pretty significant amount of heat. They're relatively inexpensive. I think it depends on what size you buy. They're obviously cheaper in bulk. And you should buy them in bulk, by the way. I buy 1 or 2 boxes, and I mean like 100 or 200 pack boxes of these every winter because I go through so many of them. But they're probably, $1 or maybe $1.50 or $2 per 2-pack of these things, which, to be honest with you, compared to the other shit that you have to wear out there to be comfortable in the winter is nothing. And if I got to pay $2 when I go fishing to keep my hands warm, that's not even a conversation, right? It's not something I have to think about. But those things work great. Don't get the sticky kind that like stick to the bottom of your foot. Those aren't what you want. You want just the normal packets. You can get the big ones that are called body warmers or super warmers. Those are great too. But you get those things when you get to the river, open the packets, shake them up, and just set them to the side while you're getting your stuff ready, while you're getting geared up or rigging up or whatever you're doing. Because they take 20 or 30 minutes to get warm. A lot of people don't know that. They think it's instant. It's not. That chemical reaction takes a while to warm up. Get them going before you start fishing, and by the time you hit the water, they're fully warmed up. You stuff them down in your pockets, and then when your hands get cold and you got to take a break, you just stuff them down in there, and it is preheated and insulated and warm and beautiful. Man, guys, it is so good to have a warm pocket to put a cold hand in. It's really, really hard to overstate. I could give you some analogies, but they would all be inappropriate, so we're going to leave those alone. But it's real good. Trust me, you're you're going to like it when your hands are cold. And you don't need a whole lot of time. So if your hands get real cold, you can just stuff them in your pockets for, I find, 3 minutes, maybe 5 at the outside if I'm like partially frostbitten. But you can put them in there for just a few minutes, and they're usually warmed up enough that you're ready to get back to fishing pretty darn quick with those hand warmers in there. You can also get away sometimes with fishing one-handed. I might just be using my rod hand while my other hand's in my pocket recharging. Maybe later on, because I'm just so darn talented and handsome, I switched to fishing with my left hand, and I put my right hand in my pocket and recharged that one for a while. So I just kind of switched back and forth without stopping the fishing at all. But those hot hands hand warmers, I believe, are the best things out there, and you should absolutely give them a shot. You can try a different kind if you want. You can try the electronic ones. I'm sure there are other solutions there that I haven't thought of, but honestly, they're so cheap and so easy to use, and they work so well, it's just hard to recommend anything else. One caveat that I will give you about the hand warmers is please don't drop them in the river. Don't leave them on the side. Don't leave them on the bank. Every winter, I probably run across 300 hot hands packets that have been left on the side of the river. Most of the time, I think it's by accident. Somebody that reached in their pocket for something and they accidentally pulled out the hand warmer and it fell on the bank and they just didn't know, or fell in the water, they didn't know. I'm sure I've done that too, to be honest. So, I'm not trying to be too self-righteous here, but those chemicals are not amazingly environmentally friendly, on top of the fact that they're pretty big pieces of litter that don't decompose terribly quickly. Try not to leave them out there if you're going to winter fish. Just, check your pockets periodically, make sure they're in there. Try not to knock them out of your pockets, and just do your best to make sure that those things go home and find their way into a trash can at the end of your fishing day, instead of finding their way into the water and into the stream, which is a real bummer. And then one other final note on that: don't get them wet. They don't work if they get wet. That seems like it should be obvious. Most things that produce heat don't work great when you get them doused in cold water. But these don't work if they're wet, so resist the temptation. If your hands are wet, don't reach into your pockets with wet hands and grab those hand warmers, or they're not going to stay warm for very long. Dry them off with your hand towel first, and then when your hands are dry, then you can go in and get a hold of those hand warmers and enjoy the warmth. But don't get them wet because they won't work. And for that reason, really, you should probably carry an extra pair in your pack, because if you do get them wet, and you could, or you drop them, whatever might happen, it's nice to have a backup pair so that you don't have no warmers for the rest of the day. But hot hand warmers, get those things recharged. That is the third bucket of things for you to think about when it comes to keeping your hands as comfortable as they can be out there. And that's basically it. There are other tips and tricks that you'll pick up as you go. You will start to build your own routine out on the river about how you do this. When do you dry your hands off? How often do you recharge them? Which pockets do you like to use? Which brand of gloves do you like? Whatever. You're going to find your own stuff, and that's cool. One of the cool things about fishing is that it's a deeply personal activity, and you can totally customize your gear and tweak it and change it and alter it however you want. But this is what I do. After many, many, many days of suffering, these are the lessons that I've learned. This is the system that I use. And it works pretty well. I fish through some really, really nasty cold, and I do it with this gear, very few modifications, gets me through the winter just fine. Not saying my hands never hurt. They do still sometimes hurt because it's cold, but you know what? They acclimate over time. Your hands will get tougher over time. You throw in some of these mitigation strategies, and you're going to be out there fishing like a champ. It's just not going to be a big factor for you, and it's certainly not going to be a painful enough factor to send you home early, which is what we're trying to avoid. So with that, we can stop talking about hands. We'll be back next week to talk about feet, a full episode about feet and how to keep your feet warm. But for now, I hope you're having a great week. This is very likely to go up the week of Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving and belated Thanksgiving if it goes up on the Friday. Hope you guys are having a wonderful week with your family. I hope you're taking advantage of a little bit of time off to get out there and fish. And most of all, hope you're staying safe out there on the winter water. See you soon. Till next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there. Unless your hands are too cold to fish.